How you doing? I'm Mikey J, and you're watching and listening to KGUP Presents. I hope you miss me as much as I've missed you. I've been off for quite a while, November of 2021 to be exact. It was a much needed break. I also needed some time off to work on my new project. Just to let you know a little bit about that project, later this year, I plan on releasing a book and documentary. I'm hoping to release both at the same time because they both work in tandem with each other. The book started out as a journey of how I became a flat earther, and it's really a compilation of my path to finding this information out because, I talk to a lot of people and I want to kind of catalog my journey with information so you can kind of get an idea of how I arrived to this conclusion, that we're not on a spinning ball. And it includes a lot of my revelations into why the lie was created in the first place. And I wanted to dispel a lot of the science that I used to believe in for many, many years. Because, if you don't know me personally, my head was in the clouds. I was a big Star Wars fan. I loved Battlestar Galactica. I mean, you name it. I watched anything that involved space and science fiction and followed NASA and most recently SpaceX. And a lot of what I've uncovered is the reason for the lie, and that part of it has always intrigued me the most. I also get into Tartaria, the mud floods, because it's all part of the same deception. A lot of my research is pretty in depth, and it's taken me a long time to gather this information. So it is going to take me a while to get this published and ready for publishing. So instead of publishing a book with a bunch of speculation, I do a talk about a lot of stuff that's never been talked about or people have just touched on the subject. So if anyone has come across the stuff that I have covered, I haven't heard about it. And so once paths do cross and I do find information from people who I admire or has done research on it, I will definitely credit that person. One of my main motivating reasons I'm publishing this book is to explain the deception and when and where it all began. Often people say controllers or they say elites or behind it all, but we think we've narrowed it down to a small number of families, but no one effectively has proven this. And, there's a lot of speculation, and I really want to uncover this and get to the bottom of it. And this is where most of my investigation begins. Before I started this, I used to think I was a great researcher, but this project has been a challenge to say the least. But, some of my background is in journalism, and some of it, I've been in various jobs where it required me to do a lot of investigating. So I'm putting all of that into good use. And, but I digress because this isn't what this episode is about. I mean, today we have an amazing guest. I've been listening to his podcast for about 5 to 6 months or so. And I've just been hooked ever since he came out with his first show. And I'm super pumped to have none other than Matt of the Great Deception podcast. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And you know I had to tell him. Yeah. The earth is flat. Bro, you need to check your facts. I got high up through the roof, and I landed on the moon flat too. In reality, everything is just in 2D, like a video game from 1983. I'm side scrolling up and down the street while y'all sleep. Call me B.O.B. cause I don't see the curve. Messing up my vibe, yeah, you got a lot of nerve. Read a book, nah, I don't wanna learn. Read a book, nah, I don't wanna learn. They say that we are archaic, but me and my homies, we don't say it, we just spray it. I'ma leave it, now I'ma stay it. Do your research, how much I gotta say it. Earth is flat, bro, you need to check your facts. I got high up through the roof, and I landed on the moon flat too. In reality, everything is just in 2D, like a video game from 1983. Besides growing up and down the street, while y'all sleep, y'all sleep, y'all sleep.
Then we look at one of their favorites, which is the Masonic Temple, which was built in 1892. This, again, we're looking at, it looks like a hotel with its size. But again, the intricacy of the detail on the outside, it's not just a plain brick building. I mean, it is massive in size and stature. Now, this leads you to believe that something must have happened in the area of the lake to cause these fires.
What you're talking about is 440 hertz, and this is what we're listening to constantly.
And it should be 432.
Yes, 432. But guess who was fucking around with that? Jimi Hendrix. What happened to him? Kurt
Bob
Cobain.
Marley.
Bob Marley. What happened? All these
Beatles,
people, dude.
Led
Amy
Zeppelin.
Winehouse. I think most of those 27 Club people were messing with the 432.
And welcome back. Today we have an amazing guest on our show today. His investigation and discoveries into Tartaria and the evidence of mud floods is worth following. He has awesome guests, and every Monday he hosts a panel with amazing guests called the Master Debaters, and they talk about a variety of topics outside of mud floods. They discuss, film and the music industries. And with that said, I'd like to bring him on, the man of the hour, the one and only Matt of the Great Deception Podcast. Great to finally meet you.
You as well.
Nice. So I'm going to do is I was having a conversation with my sister because my dad and my mom both have COVID. So it's been kind of like a dramatic thing. And
oh man.
Yeah, they're taking both of them because they're just like incoherent. And so apparently it's like really bad. And so they're going to go down to San Diego from Northern California because they can't take care of themselves. Because they're like in their 70s. And so.
Yep. Oh, man. Just what you need, right?
Right. I mean, it all just happened on Saturday, and we just been going back and forth. I'm like, do I need to fly out there? And they're like, no, we have got it taken care of. My brother's living with them. So, so that kind of helps. But that's what I'm dealing with right now.
Oh, man, you got your hands full.
Yeah. And I got this whole PDF from Dr. Brian Artis, and he's got this whole mapped out like supplement package where it's like a cocktail of like vitamin C, magnesium. They're also taking quercetin and selenium.
Okay.
And it's supposed to like help get rid of COVID out of their system. And and we all know COVID is not really what it's branded out there for. And, it's, what I personally think is whatever they're spraying in the chemtrails is whatever disease or virus that they're trying to spread. And it's really up to our personal diets is how we're going to fight it. And, if you're not, you have poor nutrition, then of course you're going to feel the full effects of it. And if you're
as
older,
with anything, right? I mean, and that's that's the funniest part about all this is because you don't see anyone on television preaching healthy diet, healthy living.
Oh, not at all.
It's such a backward system we're in right now where they're forcing you to things that are unhealthy to make you make you believe you're healthy when in reality you're making yourself less healthy.
Yeah. It's funny. I was watching the Daytona 500 and I was like, because I used to love it. I used to write for NASCAR.
Me too.
For about 4 years. I was really into it because my dad was into it. And then we both got away from it around 2012, I think. And, it was harder for me to let go of it. So I was watching like the last half and I was just watching it with an open eye and I was like, wow. It is just consumerism. Every commercial is just Taco Bell, Doritos, and anything that it would just make you sick.
Yep.
And So they're not promoting any healthy products. It's all promotion of stuff that's going to make you sick and it's going to make you fall ill to whatever they're putting out there. And it's just to make a quick buck, and they don't care about us. I mean, we're just.
Well, I saw a great meme the other day, and it said, you know why you never see an ad for Lamborghini or Ferrari? Because those people are too busy working for it.
Yeah.
Instead us, the regular people who watch the Netflix and TV, and they just bombard us with unhealthy stuff all day. And and they dress it up nice. Like you watch the pharmaceutical commercials and it's a beautiful scene, but meanwhile they're talking about 30 seconds worth of potential side effects that could kill you.
Right.
It just makes no sense, man. It's so upside down right now.
Yeah, and that's what I love about your podcast. I mean, you call it The Great Deception, so you can just talk about anything, because everything that's provided to us, everything that's shown to us, it's all a deception. And I had this like whole great introduction, but I think I'm just going to just roll right into it and just kind of like, you're on the show already. And the last couple of months, probably about 5 months or so, that's when I discovered you. I think you were a guest on My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. I think you were on, I don't know what shows you were on, but somehow you got in front of my podcast feed, and I was like, all right, who's this guy? So I looked you up, and then immediately I was just hooked, because you have just this pleasant voice, and you don't spread a bunch of like rhetoric, and you don't say all these like talking points that most like these left right talk shows the way they do, and like you're all about the information and the facts, and like so it just the way you present things is just, it's like you cut right to the chase and don't have a lot of fluff, and so that's what I like about your show. So tell me, I
appreciate that, man.
Yeah. So tell me, how did you get started into this whole like? I mean, was it the mud floods that got your attention, and you're like, oh, I need to make the show?
No, actually, I've been into alternate history and things like that for a long time now. I went to school for history. I went to a business school, but history was my minor. History and political science, because I always had an interest, and I always felt like the two tied in. Right. Mm-hmm. So, and there were times, for the last 20 years where I've been into it, and then other times where I've paid no attention whatsoever for a couple of years at a time. Mm-hmm. But, around 2006, after, watching Loose Change, that really woke me up to everything, to start seeing things with a little different lens, and that what we were being fed on a daily basis might not be real. Might not be true, at least. And then came, the podcast generation, which was such a cool thing for me, because being a history guy, there's limited television for it, and it's very propagandized. So starting to hear some differing opinions got me back into it. And, like Graham Hancock and guys like that, like Randall Carlson, they really opened me up to history again. And when they started talking about that the pyramids in Egypt and that timeline could be off, and then I was like, okay, that set me on a trail towards starting to look back into history again. And then all of a sudden came 2020, where, everything just blew up, and, Q was out there putting a lot of information out, some true, some false. And there were a lot of people that were in the podcast game that kind of really perked my interest. So I really got into them. And then the thing that set me over the top was Howdy McCoskey's book, Exposing the Expositions on the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. And I read that, and I, for probably about a week, I walked around in a daze, just wondering, like, what is real? What is reality now? Because after reading that, I started seeing that there was something wrong, right? There was something inconsistent with what I had learned throughout my formal education and what I'm learning now in a matter of, a couple days reading this book. It just shook everything. And I've always been into like I said, alternate history, but this pushed me into the old world. And ever since then, I've been, they say you go down the rabbit hole, and this is the ultimate rabbit hole, because as you go down into it, and a lot of people want to, and we can talk about that too. A lot of people want to call it Tartaria. And that's kind of a catchphrase that, lets people know what you're talking about. But I've been actually doing some research into the actual Tartaria, and we'll be putting that out in a couple weeks. But I found, because it did exist as a land, but this idea of everything else that you see out there, I don't believe it's all tied to it. It could be, and I could be wrong. And that's part of my show too, is I don't want to tell you that I know anything, because I don't really. I know what I've read, I know what I've seen, but that's just somebody else's interpretation, right? So when it comes down to it, I want people to just think, right? And that's what got me into the podcast. And my friend Ryan from the Dangerous World podcast, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have a podcast, because he just kept pushing me. You got to get a podcast, bud. You got to do it. Just start it and see how it goes. And I was like, I didn't really want to do it. And then I started it, and I started doing a few more shows with him and some other people like Mark and the Occult Rejects, my buddy, New York Patriot over there. We did a couple shows, and I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And I started in September. And so now I'm probably about 5-6 months in, and, between my show, The Great Deception Podcast, and every Monday I do a little roundtable with 4 to 5 people called the Monday Night Master Debaters. I got almost 50 shows out there now, and it's like, okay, it's starting to gain some momentum, and, I'm starting to get in a groove. And because I know you do a solo, so it's not easy doing a solo podcast. No. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. And I didn't start out this way. I started a music podcast back in like 2010. And I did like 170 episodes, and then got away from podcasting, and then came back in 2018. And it was still music. It was more like a visual. And then 2020 hit. And then I found my wife and we moved 3 weeks into the lockdowns, because I was like, you know what? I'm going to tune into Alex Jones for a minute, because I had let him go back in 2016 because there was something fishy about how he was portraying Donald Trump. And so I was very suspicious. And so I decided to just tune it out completely. And I'm kind of glad I did, because it was giving me a false perception of like who he was, and like, it just felt like he was just controlled opposition, and I just had a hard time finding any alternative truth out there that felt real. It all just felt like, like I used to listen to Ben Shapiro, and all those like right-leaning talk shows, and they were all saying the same thing. And I was like, they're not talking about real issues. And so I just got away from it all. And right around 2020, when that happened, I was like, I knew about all the China stuff, but nobody on the right was even mentioning it until it happened. Mm-hmm. And so that was very suspicious as well. So when it finally got here, I was like telling my friends, you need to stock up, because the grocery stores are going to be wiped out. And my friend was like, how did you know? Because after everything got locked down, the stores were empty. And I was like, well, it's because I pay attention of stuff that's not on mainstream. And so I was like showing him all this stuff, and he was like, oh, wow, this is just too much information. And then that's around the time that I discovered like this whole historical lie, and like, all right, there's a possibility that we're not living on a spinning ball. Because I had always, since 2014, I looked at all the information, and I was like, what, none of this stuff adds up. They try to tell us that we're flying in infinite space at 1.9 miles, 1.3 million miles an hour. And I'm like, there's no empirical way we can detect how fast we're moving, if we're moving that fast at all. And then Perseverance, is that what the spaceship that they launched to Mars? And And they try to tell us that it flew at, 248,000 miles an hour and it got to Mars within 7 months. And I was like, that is just impossible.
Yeah, think about that.
Yeah. And I'm like, I did this research and I went to space.com and they archived in an article back in 2004 that they had this ion propulsion technology that had infinite speeds that they could reach with this ion propulsion. And then they took that article down because someone did the research and discovered that they can't replicate that. And so MIT had done a study, and then another independent researcher did the study, and they could not make ion propulsion work in a vacuum. And that's another thing. We can't replicate what this so-called space vacuum is on Earth because we don't have the technology. You have this big facility up in Cleveland, Ohio, but it only it doesn't even reach the magnitude of the negative force that it creates out in space. And they couldn't make the ion propulsion work. So I was like, okay, so we really can't fly in space.
Yeah.
So all these things were happening in 2020. And at the end, that's when I came across Howdy McCoskey's video. And my wife and I were watching it, and I was like, oh my God, look at all this stuff. And it was just hundreds of acres of just this massive structures that were here. I'm like, there is no freaking way when we have horse and buggy building this stuff, transporting all of this like masonry and marble. And they try to tell us that it's like all fake. And that it was just made out of like wood and stucco. And I'm like, that's not possible. They have 300,000 people in a stadium and then tear it down in 6 months.
Well, yeah. And it's interesting because and that's why I have it as my background, because I'm just amazed by that Chicago. And if you haven't seen it, folks, just look at the picture of Chicago 1893 with the Statue Columbia. You'll see her back, and just looking through the court at the buildings, and it looks like ancient Rome. And you look at it and you listen to the story. Okay, so for anyone not aware, Chicago, where they built the World's Fair, was a swampland. Okay, and now we're talking 1893 or early 1890s is when they started planning it. So we're not talking modern tools. We're talking horse and buggy for the most part. We're talking trains as your main, way for transportation and moving materials. And then you start looking into the fair. Okay, so they built it on swamplands, almost 700 acres. Okay, and you think about that alone. Okay, that's a monumental task in itself. Now they're going to tell you on that swampland, in a 2-year time frame, we were able to put up around 150 to 200 buildings. And you're like, okay, all right, years. Well. Yeah, if it's houses, I could see that, small huts. Yeah, sure, no problem. And then you start looking at the buildings, okay? And you look at it and you look, it's like ancient Rome. These things are massive. They are decorated in ornate fashions, right? The largest building at the fair could house 300,000 people. That's 3 football stadiums, guys. For those of you that, can't really picture that, that's 3 football stadiums full of people. And that was one of the buildings that they built in 2 years. Okay. So and you start going into it, and then you find out that they had electricity. You start finding all of the, and you just look at the landscaping alone. I mean, you have these ornate statues, like I said, the buildings with the domed roofs. And now the one thing I want people to understand, and from what I'm finding in my research is, and what Howdy says is right, that they did build buildings, right? Not all of this was here. And in fact, they built a lot of buildings for these fairs, but they were the outbuildings. They weren't the main attractions for the most part. And how do you know that? Well, there's not a lot of construction photos. There's yet to be found any blueprints of any of these buildings. When it came to time for maintenance, they didn't know how to repair the buildings. So what do? At the end of the fair, guys, so they build up this fair. close to 200 buildings. They spend, 2 years supposedly building it, horse and buggy. And then they tell you that they bring in 27 million people over a 6-month time frame.
Yep.
Now, where are all these people staying? Where are they eating? Where's all the transportation? And you just start looking and breaking it down and it just doesn't make any sense. And then you get to the end of it. You get to the end of the fair and all of a sudden fires start breaking out. And all of the buildings, except for in Chicago, there's 2 buildings that remain today. Oh, there's 4 in total. 2 are in Chicago and 2 are moved offsite. One's in Maine, one I believe is in Michigan. But all the buildings burn. And then you go to some other fairs, like you look at, Philadelphia in 1876 in America. Same thing happens. They build this whole thing up and all of a sudden there's these fires that burn everything down except for a building or 2. Then you go to New Orleans and same thing, right? They build up all these, New Orleans was a smaller one. They only built like 20 buildings or so, but then they all go away at the end of the fair.
Right.
And then you think about it and you and I aren't great businessmen, but any businessman knows that if you're going to invest in something, you're not going to invest to lose money. Right. And the majority of these fairs lost money. And we're not talking we're talking millions of dollars these things lost. Yeah. So it just makes you start putting the picture together and asking yourself, why? Why would they keep reproducing these fairs only to lose money? Because that's what it was. It'd be like having, your annual carnival, right? But it kept losing money. Would you think they would keep having it? No. Or would they scale it down a little bit? These things got bigger and bigger. I mean, St. Louis in 1904 was over 1,100 acres.
Yeah.
We're taught it's tremendous. And
they took that Ferris wheel from the Chicago World's Fair and they brought it to St. Louis, which carried thousands of people. They have never rebuilt that model. And
each car on the Ferris wheel could hold around 260 people.
That's insane.
Yeah.
A freaking Ferris wheel.
But what you said is insane, right? Supposedly they broke it down, transported it to St. Louis, and then rebuilt it. I mean, that's the same story they use if anyone's interested in the 1851 fair in London, where they built supposedly built the Crystal Palace.
Yeah. Now
go check out that building. That building is another one that it's a glass structure. It's about 1,850 feet wide or long by a couple hundred feet wide, all glass and wrought iron on the frame. And so we're talking thousands of pieces of glass in 1850. And we're not talking like small, we're talking huge sheets. We're talking rounded glass. Mm-hmm. And where did they get all the materials from?
Right.
And then to top it off, they said, okay, after the fair, they broke down that Crystal Palace and then rebuilt it in Sydenham, a couple towns over. And it's like, guys, the narrative is just so preposterous that it doesn't, like we mentioned, the materials. Where did they get all of even if it's just straight lumber? Because you look in the construction photos and you'll see some lumber framing, but you look at the majority of the pictures, there's no supplies on the ground while they're building these, supposedly doing construction. There's no people around. There's like 1 or 2 people in the picture. There's never anybody working. Right. And you think about these being such symbolic pieces. Like they sold tickets to people to watch the fair be built in Chicago, and people would go there and sit on and watch them build these buildings supposedly, but nobody took a picture. Right. It's just
pictures weren't allowed.
Well, they did allow them, but what they did was they put the price so high that you or I couldn't afford it. Right. The regular person couldn't afford it. The rich could. Do you know the like a standing camera, the old box camera where they'd throw the hood over them.
Right.
To have one of those at the fair cost as much as the entire trip for the fair for a person. So just to let you know how they didn't want you to take any pictures or anything. So, but I mean, and that's, you can go through the list of World's Fairs. Buffalo, we had a president assassinated at that World Fair.
Buffalo didn't make sense either, because at that time, what year was it?
1901.
1901. There was only 20,000 people there.
Yes.
And we're expected to believe that they built all these structures, massive structures. And they built it in record time. Like, I mean, where do all these people come from? My theory is that these, I mean, Howdy said this numerous times, these are indoctrination camps. And so when they had all those orphan trains and they were shipping people across the country and, supposedly helping people with farms and stuff, when they were old enough, like 18 or 16, whenever they were departed from those farms, what they did is they put them all in trains, and they took them to these re-education camps called World Fairs. And so that's how they got just millions of people to attend these fairs over such a short amount of time. And so every one of these buildings were like, okay, this is how India looks, this is how Japan looks, and this is how, they were painting a picture of the entire world. And so you got a certificate at the end of these fairs. And so they were painting this historical narrative and re-educating everybody. So when they went out into the real world and got jobs, this is all they knew. And so
it only took one generation, right? And that's all it took. And it's fascinating because you look at, especially Chicago. Chicago is one of the most racist world fairs ever.
Oh, yeah.
From the name alone, the Great White City. The whole purpose of it was to show the European dominance, not only in Europe, but in America. And that America was going to be their beacon. Right. And what did they have there? They had baby incubators where they would have children on display in these incubator machines. Where did they get all the children for those machines? You had baby displays at like Coney Island in the early 1900s with the same thing. And it's this idea of re-education. And you absolutely nailed it on the head. These things were indoctrination camps. They had human zoos at these world fairs where they would take native peoples and show you what their life was like, and in a zoo environment. To make, and if that doesn't, tell you everything, that they thought of these people as less than. They were not up to the standard of the great white European. Yeah. And
look at these savages. Look how primitive they are.
Exactly. And if you think about it, though, what were the savages really? The savages were the people who were connected to the land. They were the old world. They were the old believers. And that's one of the things I'm finding in my research of actual Tartaria, is that the battle between the state of Russia and the Tartarian people was that they didn't want to be ruled. They lived by the old beliefs, the old ways, and they didn't want to have anyone tell them how to live. And that's what we're seeing here, is that this is the takeover. This is the industrial revolution takeover here. And they are showing you what once was, and giving you a glimpse of the past greatness. And then you go into these buildings and they're showing you all of the technology of the day and of the future and what you're going to have. So you're absolutely spot on with the whole indoctrination thing. And these things were so massive that you couldn't even take everything in one day, that you had to spend time there, right? So they really had a chance to ingrain it in your brain. It wasn't like, you go to Six Flags Great Adventure and you go ride a few rides for the day and you're gone. And, you might remember one or two of them by the end. No, this was, many people went for multiple days. Yeah. And it, it was a slow burn almost, that they just, and you watch a lot of these people. One of the most fascinating quotes I've found in all my research on this is that one of the people said that these people walked around almost like they were under a spell. And it was, it wasn't reality. You watch the video, what little video there is, but you see the people, they're just walking around, kind of just taking everything in. They're not really talking. They're not really, going through what normal people would do.
They look out of place.
And it's very similar if you think about it nowadays when people go to Disneyland. It's a very similar setup. And my buddy, Old Scary World, who has a great YouTube channel on a lot of the old world stuff, he brought up a point that blew my mind when he said, if you break down Disneyland in German, it's dies new Land, or this new land, or this new country. And you think about Disney, and they basically took the torch in the late 50s, early 60s, and have run with it since. In this indoctrination into the new way, the subliminal programming, and that's what this is all about. It's destruction of the old way, where people were connected to the earth, and you look at the buildings, and some say the buildings had, they were more than just buildings. Mm-hmm. Some say, like cathedrals originally were healing centers.
I definitely believe that.
Oh, without a doubt. You look at the intricate design, the use of sacred geometry in their design and layout, the cymatics in the windows, which weren't windows, by the way. When they were originally built, there wouldn't have been glass in there. It would have been open, so it could have sent out that frequency. And where did the frequency come from? It came from the organs within, and it's just it's such a beautiful, and that's why I'm so fascinated by the old world, because they were working with nature, whereas today we are just straight consumers of nature, and you can only do that for so long before it impacts everything around you. And you have to there's that, it's like the wave, right, where the wave eventually evens out over time. Mm-hmm. and they just set forth on this, and you look throughout the 1800s, and I mean, you can start with go to Louisiana Purchase, where we got that from France, and from then on, it was basically, that was our passport to say, okay, guys, here you go. You can go west and go take out those savages. We can't do it ourselves. We'll let you do it. And so then what do? They start the World War Zero, which is the War of 1812, where you have war in America with France involved and England involved, and then you have war in Europe with France involved and Napoleon. So, and that, you look at Napoleon going after Russia. Well, where was Tartary supposedly? That was in Western Russia. Yeah. So, but what I'm learning is, by the time we got to Napoleon, to 1812, Russia had pretty much already done in the old ways of the Tartarian people. And there is a little coincidence between the end of Tartaria and the start of America, which I find interesting, because the Russians went through a 3-year battle with, they called it a revolt, a peasant revolt. But in reality, it was basically the last stand of the Tartarian people against Russia. And Russia won in 1774 or 1775. Now, if you think about that, if Tartary is, it went from Eastern Russia all the way across through Siberia. And some, like Anatoly Fomenko, says that it went across the Bering Strait into Canada and much of the United States. Much of the Western United States was also their land at one time. Right. And so if you think about that, when if that dynasty is being killed off in 1775, America starts up and declares independence in 1776. Yeah. So what Fomenko is saying is that essentially the American, the Romanovs, when they destroyed the Tartarians, they were able to open up Western America. Because if you look at a lot of the old maps, It's fascinating because you look at like Western Canada or California, Oregon, Washington, the whole West Coast. It's usually blank. There's nothing there. There's a lot of detail of mountains and everything on the rest of the United States, but up there's nothing. And what Fomenko's saying is that the Tartarian people or whoever was ruling that land would not let the Europeans in. So they didn't know when they were drawing these maps what was there. They just knew the land was there, but they didn't know what was there. And so I find that to be a fascinating little rabbit hole. I haven't dug totally into it, but I'm on the surface of it right now.
Yeah, because I've looked at those maps as well, and it's hard to decipher when these began or what time period they actually came from. Because when you look at the maps, I mean, they kind of like there's a line, and then the line just kind of disappears, like as if it goes into this unknown abyss. Like the cartographers of that time stopped venturing off into that area, and they weren't able to connect the lands, or that was done intentionally just to confuse people, because none of the maps that we have today are accurate in any sense. I mean, the military has, even military personnel only has very specific maps they have access to. It's wherever they're headed to, and everything's sectioned in small areas, which they don't want military personnel having too much information. So they are only concerned about what they're targeting, and that's it. But as far as like a world map, I mean, there's only like a small number of people that have access to the real information, and it's not us, that's for sure.
No, you are absolutely correct. Yeah, and it's interesting about maps because I've been reading. I'm fascinated by, especially the old maps, because like I feel like that's kind of a key to let you in the door to see what was going on, who was where, what types of relationships there might have been. And one of the interesting things is that you find some of the older maps have more detail than the newer maps, which leads you to believe that they might not be as old as you're led to believe. And we know that in that Scaliger really did a number on history, and there are some thoughts out there that he may have corrupted a lot of maps as well. And that's why I say to everybody, you have to use discernment with all this.
Yeah.
And the information, even the information I'm providing to you today, I don't know any of this stuff. I don't know it for fact, but I've read it in multiple texts. So I feel comfortable with it, that it is, real in the data sense, but I can't tell you for 100% certain that this is reality. But what you can do is, if you read enough, and this is what, one of the things that Howdy says that really changed the way I think of things, because I was always trying to prove things. And he said, you're never going to prove anything. What you have to do is just disprove the lies. And once you start doing that and you disprove enough of the lies, it shows you a different picture. And that's where I'm at now. Is I'm not reinventing history. I'm just trying to find out what lies don't make sense. And then, okay, if that doesn't make sense, what would make sense? You have to be able to provide an alternative too, because you just can't say, oh, that's BS, and then go on. That's not how this works. You have to have some justification for it, because there's a lot of people out there that'll just regurgitate the same things over and over again. And I get
tired of it.
No, and that's why, with my podcast, I honestly, I'm a junkie when it comes to it. I listen to probably a couple hours a day of different people's stuff, but I've cut back lately because of that reason. It's become very echo chambery. The topics of conversation have really narrowed down, and a lot of people aren't coming out with any new material. And so I'm trying to, it's difficult, especially when you're in the area that we're in, right? Because you're hearing certain things and you're like, oh, that's a great idea. Well, but that person already did it, So, and that's another reason why I don't want to listen to a lot of people, because I don't want to start regurgitating their information. But there are certain folks that I will listen to religiously, like Michelle Gibson and Howdy and John Levy and the great folks at Autodidactic, and there's so many good smaller YouTube pages out there that I just love going. And like I said before, my friend about Scary World, he has a great YouTube page where he just puts out, short clips of old pictures. And that's his thing. He's looking for pictures that people haven't seen because, that's one of the things I like to do.
I don't know where he finds this stuff, but it's like fascinating.
It's the Wayback Machine, man.
Yeah.
And I'm into it too now. I mean, it is a fascinating thing. If you guys are into the old world, dig into the Wayback Machine, because what I've done is, instead of going the route that everybody else goes, I'm going to the source. I'm going back to the 1890s material. I found a great magazine on the Chicago World Fair from like a year before the fair even came out, when they were talking about it and showing, and I actually saw some construction photos for the first time. So you will find more information as you start going into the archives, because the easy way is to just go Google or DuckDuckGo and type it in, and you're just going to get the same narrative that's already out there. To get new information, we have to start digging into the old source materials. Now, I put a caveat with those as well, because think about the Bible, right? Even that has been corrupted, or narrowed down. So everything that's out there, even if it has an 1800s date on it, it may not be legitimate. So you have to take everything with a grain of salt and use discernment with everything that you consume.
Yeah, what I've noticed, like even because I bought a Bible as a prop, and I was starting to look at it, and I was wondering how much information was taken out. And there's like little words here and there that is different from the original text when I was learning, when I was a kid. And just certain words will change the whole dynamic of what you're reading.
Well, and then there's this whole book that was taken out.
Yeah.
This is the Apocrypha. These are all rejected scriptures from the Apocrypha. So yeah. Oh, wow. they've narrowed it down from, I use it as a prop for my laptop. It's such a thick book, but but no, you think it's stories like the Book of Enoch that they took out. There's so many stories, and you wonder why, right? You wonder why, because there are certain sects that still include it. Like the Book of Enoch is in the Ethiopian Bible. It's one of the cornerstones of their Bible. But you start looking at it and you're like, and that's why when I start reading books, I not only do I read the book, but then I'll look about the author as well, because you can start seeing certain clues or certain names that will set off alarms in your head over time. Like, I don't know if many people are familiar with a gentleman by the name of H.H. Bancroft, who he basically wrote American history for the West and for the natives. And he's an interesting guy because he came from Buffalo, which right there, when we think about the World Fair, when anytime you're talking old world and the two coincide, it's very interesting. And he went from Buffalo in 1850 out to San Francisco. Mm-hmm. Now, why did he go out there? He went out there to collect books. What books are going to be in San Francisco in 1850 if the gold rush is just started in 1849, supposedly?
Especially when it was just a bunch of cowboys and miners that went west. And so they probably didn't carry a whole lot of books on their way. No.
Yeah, they might have had a map or two, but that was it. Right? I mean, they're not, these guys aren't scholars that are going out there. And so what it leads me to believe is he was sent out there to find books. Anything that's out there, collect it, evaluate it, and then we're going to put out our version to fit the narrative that we want to be told.
Unless he was there to investigate all the existing buildings along the way, like in Cleveland and St. Louis and Chicago and, Utah, which there was all these structures that were still there and abandoned, not in use until the 1800s. So it's possible he could have gone to each one of those buildings and found those books that were there.
And that's one of the things I'm thinking too, is it was a cross-country trip, and we'll make some stops along the way and check in at key cities, like the ones that just so happen to have a World Fair in them. And we might go try and find a library, you know, that you think you see all these beautiful buildings in the background here and you think, they might have had some books in there. You know, that looks like a pretty civilized culture that probably had some reading material. And where did it go?
Yeah. It was just like in Utah. I mean, there was these giant notoriums where they had these natural springs, and there's massive buildings that just were in the middle of nowhere. Just like all these world fairs were out in the middle of nowhere, and you know, they attracted all these millions of people. But they had these giant pools, kind of like the ones that they had in like England and like Italy, where they were there to regenerate your, you know, there were like magnesium baths. And magnesium, I mean, if you ever taken a magnesium baths, it is just healing. It draws all the toxins out of your body.
Oh, it's so invigorating.
Yeah. And there's nothing like it. But these natural pools would have these, you know, people would just go in there, and they were healing centers, really.
Natural, right?
Yeah.
Natural. They didn't go to a pharmacy. They went to the earth. They went back to Mother Nature.
Right. So that's I've been uncovering so much stuff in the last like 6 months. And in December, I decided to just take a break from interviewing, and I wanted to work on a book because I've come across so much information that I'm trying to write a collection of like all my discoveries over the last 2 years and kind of catalog everything, you know, to help wake up people who I just kind of like bring this stuff up in conversation, and then they're just like, oh, that's not possible. I mean, I believe in science, and you know, I've taken the the vaccine, and so, you know, I want them to be aware, like, stop, you know, turn off your television and be in the moment, because I mean, I was deceived for many years, and most of my life I was just in a fog, in kind of like this deep sleep. Even when I discovered that 9/11 was a falsity, and JFK was another conspiracy, and you know, John F. Kennedy Jr. I mean, they weren't even scratching the surface of like the real truth out there. And you know, when 2020 rolled around, and I discovered like this whole flat Earth deception, and there was this like, okay, well, you know, I came across the whole disk in space nonsense, which is to kind of like make flat earthers look crazy when they're doing a really good job at it too. So, I mean, you try to search anything on Google or YouTube, and that's what you're going to find. We're just a bunch of lunatics that have no idea what science is. And that whole part of the deception is like hiding history, and a lot of my research is, you know, you can tie it down to like John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie, and how they put money into the Guggenheim and the Smithsonian, and how they were able to place their historians that they wanted to put into society and in the education and like, you know, the universities, and to program people into believing a certain narrative. And so our entire history has just been wiped clean, and they've painted this whole new world of deception and lies, and we need to try to undo it. Those of us that know need to undo it.
Yeah, and that's the tough part, right? Is knowing and seeing it, and then trying to walk that tightrope of how do I get others to see it, right? Because in the beginning, when you first start doing this and you start seeing it, you just want to tell everybody. You know, you want to, you know, wake everyone up and be like, hey, listen, do you see what I just found? They're doing this, they're doing that.
We sound like lunatics.
Oh, and then you start seeing that stare, right? You get that blank stare, and the jaw drops a little bit, and you're like, oh no, I'm like, I just broke their brain. And you realize over time that there's a subtle approach you have to take. And I love the idea that you have of doing a book, because I've been talking with a buddy of mine about doing a podcast series about that, about, you know, how to take the red pill, like how to slowly ease someone into this without sending them over the edge. You know, I mean, everybody reaches their breaking point at one point. And when you do realize it, you go through this stage where it's tough because your prism is broken. Everything that you knew or you thought you knew suddenly has a different feel to it. And that's where, and that's why I wanted to do my podcast. And I didn't want, I didn't plan on it being just history. I wanted to expose, I'm big into, things like Operation Paperclip and how the government works. I like exposing the Jesuits and their influence on things around the world. And, there's so much to it. You go back to the story of Columbus and that whole myth. I mean, I go through it with my son because I have an 8-year-old, and it's tough because he goes to public school. We're in a small town, so it's not like, the inner city public school. We're in a rural town, very small, and still has that small town feel to it. So they do a great job teaching the kids, except the mainstream indoctrination, right? You get in, they still do, at Thanksgiving, he was big into the Pilgrims, and we had a big discussion about the Pilgrims. And, at Christmas, I haven't broke the whole Santa thing to him yet, but it's like, that whole thing, it's all about consumerism. The whole idea that they wrap this up in a religious holiday, it's all about money. And when you start digging through this stuff, you start realizing it's about two things: money and control. And if you follow the money, it will lead to the control, and that's where you need to start looking.
Right. And I've uncovered so much stuff. I kind of lost my train of thought because I was just listening to what you were saying, and I had this great point that I wanted to bring up, and I think oh darn it. I hate it when I have one of those brain farts. But I was you had mentioned that you talk about other stuff, and on the last couple of episodes that you had on the master debaters, you were talking about the music industry and entertainment with who was it, Davey?
Yep, Davey from Red Pill Cartel and Old Scary World.
Yeah. And you guys were talking about so much stuff because when I was in LA, because I lived there for about almost 12 years before we moved out here to Dallas, Texas. And I tried so hard to get into, to the inner circles of the music industry, because that's where I wanted to be. You
were in the belly of the beast out there.
Yeah. I was a Grammy 365 member. I volunteered as much as I could. I went to a lot of like these singer-songwriter events and went to the Grammy, pre-Grammy award shows, and, got to meet some great people. I think I met the most number of people when I was driving for Uber between 2016 to about 2019 when I stopped. And I met John Legend's agent, and we actually went to his house, and he was telling me how Hillary Clinton wanted to have him perform at her inauguration show, or one of her shows up in LA, to get more people to donate to her campaign. And he declined it because, she seemed like this very evil, distant person. And, I was like, wow, this is coming from his agent. He's like letting me in on a little secret. And, it just made me realize, like, the industry in LA, like the whole Hollywood scene, is just, you're just pining for something, getting closer to the beast system. And I'm so glad I left when I did, because every one of those people, they're following everything that's on mainstream. Like, you can't go to a venue without showing proof that you have, you've been vaccinated. Yep. And so I'm like, I'm so glad I'm not in that. Because my wife, she's still a performer. She's a singer-songwriter. She's about to release an album this year. And she's made more money just performing at local venues and getting more recognition and getting more notoriety, just being here in Dallas, Texas, which isn't the best place for entertainment. Everybody thinks you need to go to Hollywood, but you in order to make it, you got to sell your soul, and you have to be a certain age, and you have to be gullible and just be ready for the mind control.
You have to make it. You have to go to Hollywood to make it to their level, right? Yeah. To make it, you can make it anywhere, especially nowadays in the digital age. And one of the guys I follow in the music industry who's independent is Ryan Upchurch. And that's one of the things that he says, because he's got people all the time. He started in country, does a little bit of hip hop and rock and roll. He does a little bit of everything. Very talented guy. But he's stayed in his hometown the whole time. He's had record labels chasing him for 5-6 years now, and he just keeps shooting him down because he doesn't want to take that route. And anybody that asks him, they're like, "Oh, I'm coming to Nashville to make it." He goes, No. He goes, "Make it where you are. And then you can come here if you need to, because otherwise you're, like you said, you're going to get wrapped up in it. You're going to do something you regret just to make it. And it's not worth it." And a lot of people, end up paying that price. There are a lot of musicians who have sacrificed their lives to make it and be famous. Right. And you probably want to ask them at the end, was it worth it? And someone would probably say no. Someone would probably say yes. It depends on the person. But, I'm not one of those. I can't, I despise money. I'm not a money guy at all. The whole concept of it gives me it's such a dirty concept, and right. We actually talked about it on the Master Debaters last week, was that because my buddy Ryan, he's like, I'm not ashamed to say it. I want to be rich. And I'm like, I get that, but I've seen ultra rich people. I used to work for really, really wealthy people, and it's not all it's cracked out to be. Yeah, they have all the money to do whatever they want, but there's still an emptiness there. Just because you have all that money, you are not fulfilled as a person. You just have more means to go by. Yeah. And, it's a lot of people lose that, especially in today's day and age, the TikTok era and everything. They want fame, right? Everybody wants to be, famous. They want to go viral. And it's like, no, that's not what it's about. It's about the grind. It's about making it. It's the day by day process. And eventually you catch your break, and you've been putting the work in, and your chance comes, and now it's your time to shine. Not, I'm going to get lucky off one video and ride it for the rest of my life. Ask Milli Vanilli how that went.
Yeah. And I'm definitely much happier living out here, because we're not hustling to make ends meet. And because in LA we were making a lot of money, but it still felt like we were poor, because a lot of people say if you make less than 250,000, you're living week to week, and we were living week to week, and we had nothing to show for it. I mean, anytime we had any kind of money, we would splurge and spend $150 on dinner, and that was, I mean, we didn't get to really travel because everything was so damn expensive. And
it makes you think, is it worth it? We work so hard just to live. Shouldn't it be the other way around, where we live, or we live to work? It should be, we work just to live a little bit, just put in a little bit, and I think my friend Kyle, who does the Conspiracy and the Force show, he's been focusing on this a lot lately. Because he has young kids too. And it's like, I wonder about that sometimes, putting in, we all put in our 50, 60 hours a week, and, you got your kids only get a couple hours, and, they ask you to play, but it's time to go get on the bus. And, it's just like, why can't we just do what we want to do when we want to do it? And it's because of the system. That's the way the system has been set up, that you have to. And not only did they, and people laugh, they're like, oh, well, that's just, no. Well, it's been set up this way. Yep. The whole women's movement, the whole feminization movement of the 60s and 70s was to get women in the workforce, because then they could have 2 taxable incomes in each house. And then any children would then have to go to the state, whether it's school, whether it's daycare, whether it's, and they're out of the hands of the parents. And like you said, though, the money, is it worth it? And that's something I've been fighting myself with for a while now, because I work a regular job, and then on the side I was doing coaching baseball and doing baseball instruction and things like that as a side hustle. And it got to the point where I'd come home and I'd see my little man, and he'd be getting ready for bed, and I'd be like, man, I didn't even see him today. I saw him for like 10 minutes. But I made some good money at doing my extra work at baseball. And it got to a point where I was like, you know what? I don't care how much you pay me. this little man is going to be out of the house in a certain amount of time. I got to spend every minute I can with him, as long as I can provide for him, and
Right.
and different people have different approaches, but mine has been, I feel like this world is a beautiful place. There's, abundance everywhere if you believe in it. And if you do the right thing and have a good attitude, yeah, shitty things are going to happen along the way.
Yeah.
But you pull your pants up, you get up, you dust yourself off, you keep moving forward, and you will be provided for. That's, life it's not easy, but it's a journey. It's your experience, and you make out of it what you will. And that's why, I love the old world. It circles back to that all the time, because it's such a fantastical place when you start looking at it. If you take all the great sci-fi movies and combine them, there's probably a little bit of truth in each and every one of them.
Oh yeah.
They don't just make up these stories out of nowhere. And they say a lot of creation comes from the ether, right? It comes to you from outside. And so it was out there somewhere. And I think that as we dig into the old world, we'll start to understand our world better. And that's at least my hope.
Yeah. And, Michelle Gibson really inspired me to do all this research, because she was like, we need more boots on the ground. And so it's made me look at everything around me in a whole new perspective. Like my wife and I, thankfully, she loves everything that I love. And, we went to San Antonio last year, and we just were walking around, and we were noticing how old these structures were, and how the roads were just uneven. And there was all these, it looks like 20 feet of structure was just buried, awkwardly. In that the Alamo, I'm going to be doing an interview with Michelle Gibson next month. And part of my presentation was like I was showing her like a map of the Alamo. In what they were doing, they were protecting these old structures. It wasn't just about protecting the Alamo itself. They were protecting this building, which was the United States Post Office now, but before it was the I'm trying to remember, but it was something about these Catholic organization for women back in the late 1800s, and that was taken over once the United States had taken over that territory. They turned it into a post office. But for I don't know how long, but it was this other entity, and it was like a religious thing for women. And so like these structures that were there just probably hundreds of years. I mean, even the Alamo itself was built in the early 1700s, and it was probably built before that. And so we're told this whole Davy Crockett story, which sounds totally made up. All these characters and heroes and like, all that, the whole storyline's probably just totally made up. But, San Antonio is one of the oldest cities here in Texas, and it's fascinating. We took one of those ghost tours, and we were thinking, we would hear the real history of San Antonio, but they didn't touch on anything. And I was like, all right, why aren't we talking about this building? Like, what was below and what was it before, Yep. And nobody knew anything.
That's what you're not going to get. And that's the disheartening part about it, is that even these quote unquote historical places are not going to tell you the true story. I mean, I'm out in Massachusetts, and I'm new to the area here. I've been in Connecticut for probably about 30 years or so. But up here, and I was listening to, I forgot which part, the Veritas podcast.
Project Veritas.
No, Veritas by Mel Hosterick.
Oh,
and he does some interesting interviews with a lot of scholars and things like that. And he had this guy on who had done some work in my area, and he had gone to the local museum here. Now, mind you, I'm in a very, very small town, and for him to name the museum of the town I'm in, it's like, oh my gosh. And he's like, yeah, I went in there, and he asked to see the journal of a guy who was around here, because there were giant bones found in the area, and it's on record, but it's not displayed in the museum. Mm-hmm. It's in the archives. So you have to know about it to be able to see it. And so much like you now, I'm fascinated by my area. So come springtime, when things thaw out a little bit, I'm going to start doing the whole boots on the ground approach myself and start checking out what's around here, because out here we have a ton of history.
Oh yeah.
You know, I mean, this area is just ripe with history all along the East Coast. So it'll be very interesting to see what we find along the way.
Yeah. In the city of Rockwall, which is, like 10 miles north of here. And someone had uncovered a wall that was buried like 20 feet below the surface. And it is 20 square miles, this wall. And so he invited all these scholars from all the local universities, like Texas A&M and Baylor University. And they kind of pushed it off as like some natural phenomenon, or it was built by aliens. And so then they also found remains of a skull, which fit what, the scale of it would fit between 1,000 to 1,600 pound man. Yeah. And so that got shipped off to who knows where, and it's just archived.
Most likely the Smithsonian. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's another thing. You mentioned it before, the Smithsonian Institute. I mean, that's one where they are the ultimate hiders of history. Yeah. And you look at their creation, even the building that they're in is an old world building that they took over and claimed and quote unquote founded. Yeah, exactly. Between the Smithsonian and the Vatican archives, if I can get 2, free passes, that's where I want to go, because I feel like we could uncover so much of our true history if we could just get access to those spots.
Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. What do we need to do to get there? It's a monumental effort, but doing what we do, and even us doing our little part of just exposing it and getting it to a few more ears, it's like I said before, it's creating that wave. We're just getting it out there, and it's just started. In reality, I mean, people have only been looking at this stuff for a handful of years. Even the whole Tartaria idea concept didn't come in. It's less than a decade old in reality. So I think as we get more, people looking at this and start looking at some form, there's a lot of old texts in, languages that I don't read, but, that will have to get translated. And I think there's a lot of information that is in the public domain now that we're finding and uncovering. And it's a day by day journey. There's days when I think I feel like I know what's going on. And then there's other days where I feel totally clueless, and that's the battle.
Yeah. I'm 62 pages into my book, and I feel like I haven't even touched what I would really want to talk about, because I'm constantly getting to this like rabbit hole of like, all right, once I try to prove and cite where I'm getting this information, it's leading me into another rabbit hole. And now I'm kind of like in between like the robber baron era and like where the hidden lie originated from. And it all ties into making this perfect worker. And because the Andrew Carnegie, J.D. Rockefeller and Henry Ford, they all wanted people to be able to work for them, and they wanted to work them to the bone and just only focus on work. And so they had to create this whole narrative of like, well, if you believe we're spinning in space and it's endless, then there's no possible room for God in that scenario. So this is the only life that we're going to know. And, that's why it is very hard to become independent and just buy your own property and just live off the land, because they only give us so much money to live where we live. If you want to live close to the metropolis where you have a good job, you can barely afford to feed your family and put enough away to send off your kids to college, and they have the latest technology. And that's about it. If you're wise, you put money away and you invest in something and you make it big, but then you're still caught up in that whole system of being asleep, and you're into sports, and you don't have time to investigate and look into like the realities of our realm. So we're just caught up in this, like, you know, we're hamsters in wheels, and we're just stuck in this like life. And I know for a fact there's so much more out there. We need to be in tune with our frequencies and be closer to nature. And you know, just walking out into the grass with your shoes off connects you to the earth, and you can feel the positive vibrations. You can heal yourself without taking all these meds. You know, I mean, there's so much to life than just seeing what's on television. You know.
Yeah, I agree, man. And that's what really woke me up was I was diagnosed in 2016 with rheumatoid arthritis. And, you know, as being like a person in their late 30s and hearing that, you know, I was athletic my whole life, you know, very active. I was like, man, how does this happen? Like, this isn't supposed to happen to me. You know, it's mainly happens to women. It mainly happens to people of color. And I'm like, well, I'm obviously none of those. How does this happen? And so you start looking into it, and it's all food based. Yep. You know, it's all it all ends up going back to that. Yeah. And then you look at the other aspect that they don't look at in the medicine field, which is the mental side of it, you know, the psychosomatic side of it. And so I, you know, when I realized, and I went to a doctor, and I started doing my own research, being the person that I am, where I, you know, you tell me I'm going to have something. Okay, I'm going to find a way to beat it. How am I going to beat it? How am I going to get around this? And I started doing my research. And when I went to the doctor, I would ask him questions, and he would just, you know, kind of poo-poo them. And then at the end of the thing, he'd be like, okay, so what prescription are we going to go with this time? And I'm like, no, I don't want prescriptions. You know, I want to do this naturally. And he's like, no, you got to get on something, you know, and okay. Yeah. So I got on it, and the whole time I'm doing my research, and I'm having these awful side effects from this stuff I'm putting in my body. And I start reading about it, and it's like, they use this medicine for abortions sometimes. And I'm like, what is going on here? I'm like, this can't be good. So I said, you know what? I'll deal with whatever repercussions I have to deal with, but I'm getting off of this system. And I just cold turkey one day was like, nope, I'm not going back to the doctor. I'm going to figure out how to do this. And 2020 came. I got divorced in 2020, you know, so the most stressful time in my life, where this, you know, medical condition should be through the roof. Mentally and spiritually, I was at the most peace in my life. It all went away. But all the stress, you know, so it was one of those where I started learning, oh, it's not, and granted, a lot of it was diet, you know, I was very acidic in my diet and things like that. But the larger part of it was the stress of life. Yeah. It was the mounting bills that I had going on in my life. It was, you know, my marriage wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. I mean, it was unfulfilling. And, you know, and I had my son who is in the middle of all this. And I'm like, well, how do I raise my son when, you know, I'm being told in 10 years, I might not be able to use my fingers anymore. I might, you know, have to do something. So I was just at a point where I'm like, you know what, I'm going to get myself right. I'm going to get some back to spirituality and try and, you know, like you're saying, ground, you know, go outside a couple minutes a day with no shoes on. You know, I was one of those guys. I would wear my socks at the beach. You know, like I didn't, before I understood all this, like I wanted, you know, protection. You know, I wore my sunglasses everywhere. And now it's like, you know, I don't even know if I own a pair of sunglasses anymore. And, you know, it's these little things that, you know, you thought were weird when you were younger. You were told they were, you know, oh, why would you do that? You know, why, I'm, you know, go watch the TV, you know, don't go outside, you know, that's nowadays. Whereas when we were kids, my mom was grabbing us by the back of the shirt and couldn't throw us out of the house fast enough. Yeah.
Yeah. I you know, what I remember back when, like mid 2000s, I mean, I was wearing SPF 100 because I thought the sun was bad for us. Not, you know, just believing the science. And, then later I discovered that all these sunblocks and the sprays that people are putting on is what's causing the cancer. And, it took most of my life to freaking realize that everything that we've been buying is just contributing to our slow and painful death. And like just recently I discovered that, sunglasses cause your body to not produce the melanin from the sun. So you should, every time you go outside, you should not wear sunglasses of any kind. The UV protection is bad for our skin. And
it's part of the reason why you get such bad sunburn.
Yeah. And sun gazing was kind of like, don't look at the sun, because you'll go blind. And so we believe that for most of our lives, when really we need to gather strength to be able to look at the sun, not directly into it, but around it. And it has all these healing properties that we can just naturally tap into.
And why do you think they wanted us to stay inside, right? They shut down the beaches during this lockdown and everything. It's like they don't want you to get the sun. The sun is, right. And why are they trying to block out the sun, right? I mean, you think about all these things and it sounds crazy, but when you put them all together, you start to see this picture where you realize and understand that these people who go on television and tell you they're out for your best interests really don't give a damn about you. And they want you sick. They need you sick to be in their system.
You're
and
more profitable.
Yes. And it's such a shame, because between, like you said before, they want good workers. And when you said that, I thought back to Old World and the Anunnaki. And supposedly the whole reason why we were created was to mine gold for them. Right. That was the purpose of humans being created. And I think about that and I'm like, wow, yeah. And that great reset that happened in the 1800s with the industrial age, they did the same thing. They just wanted to create the ultimate worker. They didn't want any questioning. They didn't want you to be able to produce on your own, because if you can produce on your own, you're not dependent on the system anymore.
Right.
So it's just it's one of those where it does, everything is connected. And you people laugh when they say, oh, well, if this is such a conspiracy, how come nobody talked about it? How come nobody came forward and waved the flag that this is what's going on?
Well, they'll lose their grants if they do.
Yeah. One is, money. They're not going to do it, because if they do come and speak out, they're either A, going to lose their livelihood, or B, they're going to lose their life.
Yeah.
So one of two. And then on the other side of it, you start looking at it, and they also control the information side. So even if you're trying to get the message out, it may fall upon deaf ears, because you can't even get it out, because they censor it to a point where your message is not getting out. So they've made it so that even if you do want to speak out, you won't. And then on the other side of it, they compartmentalize, right? Not like you said before about the maps with the army. No one person is going to have all of that control. It's going to be compartmentalized. One person will have one piece, another group will have another piece, and they can come together and show the whole thing. But individually, they're useless.
Yeah.
So anyone that questions it, it is a very compartmentalized system. And listen, they've been doing it for hundreds of years.
Oh yeah. It's nothing new.
Or thousands of years, I should say. It's the same playbook over and over and over again. And do they fail? Yeah, they fail a lot, but we don't see it. Right. And what do? They just regroup and go at it with a different plan of attack, or same plan of attack, just different players involved.
Yeah. And as each new empire comes and wipes out another civilization, then they destroy all of their history, all their books. I mean, we try to blame everything on the Nazis, but it's been happening long before that. And so there's just wiping out little parts of history. And so we really don't know how old this world is and how big it is. We don't know, the actual shape of it. We don't know a lot of stuff. And it's all intentional. And only a small group of people have access to all of it, And
I always go back to the movies. Like, and I've already mentioned it here, but I think there's truth in there. You watch some of these movies, you know, even the Kong versus Godzilla, where they're telling you about Hollow Earth and the firmament and things like that. They're giving us little clues in there as to things that are reality. But you just have to be willing to see it. And that's where a lot of people, like you said before, they're just into the bread and circus of it. They just want to, you know, they had a long day of work. They come home. They just want to relax. The last thing they want to do is have to think anymore. So what are they going to do? They're going to turn on the Black Mirror and just let their brain go on autopilot, versus taking that time and going and doing a little research, opening a book, you know, maybe watching a documentary on something that could help you or let you know what's going on. And I saw an interesting stat today that regarding what's going on right now in general, and it said about 40% of the people are adamant about their freedom. 30% are on the fence. They could go either way. And then there's 30% who are going to side with the government no matter what. They are just beyond, you know, reproach. They've been so well indoctrinated that no matter what, I mean, they could tell you, they could be beating you over the head with a stick and tell you they're not beating you with a stick, and you'd believe them. That's how, you know, and I did an episode on this with a guy, a Russian gentleman by the name of Yuri Bezmenov, who talked about the 4 stages of basically the way that communism was going to overtake America. And it wasn't with any bullets. It was just simply with indoctrination and behind the scenes programming. And, you know, you look at it and we're at step 3 of 4 right now. I mean, in one of the steps is you will be able to tell the people the truth, and they will tell you that you're lying.
Yeah. I mean, I tried telling people that we've had warships outside of Ukraine since July of last year, and no one believed it. Yeah. And all of a sudden, it's on the news. It's like, we've been there since July.
Oh, well, because why? Because they weren't telling you that, right? And we got distracted in August by Afghanistan, and then there's, you know, this and that, and that's. I laughed because a buddy of mine texted, you know, I'm on a group chat with some friends, and he texted a picture of what's his name? The guy who just hung himself, the child trafficker. I don't remember his name. He's friends with Epstein. Another one of those guys who was found hanged in a jail cell yesterday. And he's like, was it Jean-Luc something? French guy.
Card.
yeah. Captain.
Yeah.
But what he sent it to me, and he goes, oh, you believe this? Another Epstein on our hands. I go, listen, man. I go, this is a distraction. I go, it's the same day they told you the Queen has COVID. I go, they are trying to get you to look over here because something else is going on over there. And what that is look at what they're doing in Australia with using weapons on their people. And the same thing in Canada, peaceful protesters being hit with batons, sprayed with mace, shot with rubber bullets. And it's like, that's what you have to realize. What they're showing you on the news is what they want you to pay attention to. It's not the real stories.
Right.
And, you know, and it's disgusting because a lot of people just eat up that mainstream narrative and believe it all the way through. And that's what we're battling, because we go out there and can have all the valid research and paperwork to show them. But if what they've heard on the news overrides that in their head, good luck.
Yeah. The only way you can disseminate is by turning it off. You know,
yes,
they're not going to talk about what happened in Calgary the other day or today. I think it just started today. There's like a whole protest down there or up there. And
is there?
Yeah. And so what they're doing in Ottawa is almost the same thing as going on in Calgary. And then they're shutting down the streets. And good. I mean, Trudeau needs to recognize what's really going on and stop just speaking for the WEF. You know.
Well, yeah, we're getting to a point where you have two choices, right? You can follow the authoritarians or you can follow the libertarians. You're either going to have liberty or you're going to have pure autocracy. And that's what they want. And that's what they're pushing. And we've seen it for the last 2 years that You give them an inch, they will take a foot. And once you give up that inch, you're never getting it back. So anybody that says, oh, it's just a mask, oh, it's just, just do it and it'll be over. No, because every time you cave, especially when it doesn't make sense, you have to understand that there's certain places to hold your ground and certain, hills to die on, but there's others that you really have to hold your ground, because if we start budging on them, it's gonna, and one of the things is like our Second Amendment rights, right? You start looking at that, and how are they're not going to come and they're not going to just wholesale swoop up your guns. What they're going to do is they're going to slowly start limiting clip size. Then they're going to start limiting the types of weapons you can have. Then they're going to start limiting the number of weapons you can have. And then it comes down to, then you're stuck with something you can't defend yourself with. And you're at the point where you have to give it up. And that's how they're going to do it. It's not, everybody thinks that they operate in this very drastic manner. No, it's a slow drip. And they slowly take it away from you until by the time you realize it, it's gone.
Yeah, and then they've taken almost 170 years. This slow drip.
Oh yeah,
and it's coming to a head.
It is, and but the funny thing is we're starting to see some things that just don't make sense about today, and that's what we saw back then too, with, like you mentioned, between the orphan trains and the rise of insane asylums. And I just really feel like the insane asylums were physical buildings, whereas today they just shadow ban or suspend you from social media.
Right.
And that's your sentence, because I think you look at the timing of the insane asylums, and that's right around the time of the reset. And gee, what a good way to get rid of anyone who is not willing to accept the narrative and just label them as crazy.
And I'm a little suspicious about the whole, insane asylums. And it just so happens to be in the same time period that all these orphan trains they were shipping all these kids out. So were they using these as baby making, asylums where they're mass producing all these kids and raping these women? I mean, who knows what was going on, but I don't think it was for the good of the people. They were doing something very sinister.
Because you also see these large orphanages at this time, right? I mean, and that's another one. It's like, where are all these kids coming from? And where did all the parents go? If these are real legitimate babies, but I'm much like you. I'm trying to find that key that'll unlock this, to say that there was some genetic manipulation back then. And I think that's a possibility. You can't discount it yet, but when you look at the baby incubators, if they could keep preemies alive, what's to say they couldn't create them?
I found this book. It's called the King's Handbook of New York, and it catalogs all the orphanages, all the asylums, dating all the way back to the early, 1843. I think that's when they started cataloging all these asylums. And it's just amazing how many of these asylums just housed hundreds of people, not just dozens, but hundreds.
Oh, hundreds. Yeah, they were full.
And our populations back in those days were barely, notable to have that many rooms to each of these buildings. Like, why?
If we're talking, think about it. Chicago in the 1850s had about 35,000 people. Mm-hmm. So we're talking small numbers here to have these massive, like you're saying, hundreds of kids in an orphanage. And this wasn't in one area. This was across the country. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you're absolutely right there. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't. 1 and 1 doesn't equal 2 there.
No.
And where do they? A lot of them came from Europe, though. And that's another story. You start thinking about it. So you just put all these kids, no parents, on a ship and send them across the Atlantic in the 1800s. It's like, I don't know. I mean, it goes along with like the slave ship narrative that, how do you keep all these people alive if you have them in these conditions?
Yeah. I mean, that's another thing, like the whole Civil War,
Oh,
like a just that's an onion that it just has multiple layers, like, and Michelle Gibson kind of barely touched the surface of like the batteries and the star forts and how they were used in the war, but were they really used for war? I mean, some of these battlegrounds had no cemeteries at all, or areas where there were supposedly all these dead bodies, and there's none. You know, it's very puzzling how this whole historical narrative is just. I mean, there's lies everywhere. It's
oh
incredible.
yeah. And especially in that period, right? We're talking the 1800s is such a wild time. You look at year after year, and then you look at all the cities that were destroyed by fire. It's like, how does this happen? How
Yeah.
do all of these cities get destroyed by fire? From the East Coast all the way across the Midwest. Every major city has a massive fire that basically, in all purpose, it just destroys it. I mean, you're
What?
left with remnants. And then you look at the photographs, and it looks like it was a blitzkrieg,
Yeah.
or a bombing raid, because brick buildings are just into rubble. And, then you look across the way. If you look at a wide shot, there's like one or two wood huts that
Mm-hmm.
survived, but yet these massive brick buildings are down. I
Yeah.
mean,
It's funny that
I
you mentioned Blitzkrieg, because if you think about it, they couldn't have enough fires quick enough. And so when World War II came around, what better way to destroy evidence of the old world by having these air raids and blitzkriegs? I mean, they were bombing each other in Germany and in England. I mean, I was watching a video with my wife from a 1905 video of these trains that went through Germany, and you could see the architecture. It was just massive, huge
oh
buildings, and beautiful and so technologically advanced, and all gone. After World War II, all that stuff is gone.
yep.
In
France, Germany, Belgium, that whole area over there. I mean,
Yeah,
and you look at it, it's 18, it almost seems like 1812 was the start. And then you go to the Civil War, and in the Civil War, you look at like Sherman's March, and there is no explanation to that other than that was just to go eliminate anything from the old world.
yeah,
I mean, what he did down there made no sense whatsoever, to just totally raise areas. And then you get into World War I and World War II, and that's just finishing off Europe. Yeah.
yeah,
And that's what it really feels like. And then you start getting into, I mean, even the modern day wars. You look at what happened in Syria. What were they doing? They were blowing up old buildings and old statues. And when we went into Iraq, well, the first thing we did was go guard the museum, right? We got to get
yeah.
those, make sure those relics are okay. And it really makes you wonder why are we fighting all these conflicts? Is it really about people or territory, or is it about destroying the narrative? And
Yeah.
I'm with you in the sense that I think that the Civil War story, as well as World War I and World War II, the main purpose of it was destruction.
Yeah, World War I was really their first worldwide organization, and they had to get rid of anybody who was defiant against their order, because I think that Franz Ferdinand, it was another story about his assassination started World War I. But he was, I looked into his story, and he was really kind of like the ambassador for all the countries, and he was keeping everybody at peace and doing trade, and had this like economic thing that was keeping everybody still together. And the powers from like you know um, the people from the old world did not want what they wanted to be separate, and well, they wanted everybody to be as one. So we're under this guise of this separation between Russia and the United States and England, but we're really closer than what they want us to believe. And so I'm still uncovering all this stuff. to put in my book, but I might have to have multiple books because it's going to be so massive.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, and like you said, though, what happens is you start going down one avenue and three more branch off from that. And that's
Right.
what this whole, Tartaria thing did with me, because I started with the buildings,
Mhm.
and then that led into, star forts went to Crystal Palaces because of the 1851 World Fair. And there are Crystal Palaces throughout the world in the 1850s, and every single one of them burns down. It's crazy. Every single one of them has a fire. And then I was like, okay, that's interesting. Then I got into star forts, and you start looking at them, and every narrative that you read on them is that they were strictly a military defensive position.
Mhm.
And you're like, okay, that doesn't seem to make sense for all the effort. Why would you, require cymatic shapes and, all the use of water in them and their locations, and how, if you look at them on a map, how they interact with each other, and they're always within close proximity. They're usually in tandem.
Yeah.
And the story just doesn't make sense. I mean, you look at the one in, I think it's Fort Jefferson down in the Keys, and it took 17 million bricks to build this thing.
Good
Where
grief.
are you producing 17 million bricks? And not to mention, it's in the middle of the ocean.
Mhm. Right.
So it's like, yeah, they built it in the 1850s.
Yeah.
That's all. That's and supposedly in the 1850s in America, we built like 90 star forts, like 90 on top of, I laugh because they had that, what was it? The City Beautiful movement in the 1890s,
Mhm.
where they were, and that was basically what they used to say that these old buildings were going to be the new buildings. And it was just to beautify all these cities and bring up the architecture. And it lasted for like 20, 25 years. And then all of a sudden the movement stops, and we go to this modern era of architecture. And it's fascinating, because the possibilities are out there. You look at the cathedrals, and like we talked about with possible free energy with the ether, using ether and mercury and all that. And you get into the radium fireplaces in these old buildings because there's no heat. And if you think burning wood in that fireplace is going to heat structures this size, you're out of your minds. And that's one of the things I always wondered as a kid. Was we watched all these movies with castles, and it's like, how did they keep the castles warm?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, these are these big rock buildings and massive, and they just have this little fireplace in there to heat this huge room. Like, how does that work? Because I know in my parents' house, we got like a 20 by 20 living room, and it barely stays warm with the fireplace blaring.
Yeah. I did see, I don't know what I was watching or looking at, but all the potbelly stoves, they were all made out of radium.
Mm-hmm.
And we would never make that now at all.
No. And they ruined a lot of those by putting wood in there and burning logs in them. They would try and do it. And you look at the buildings, the chimneys don't match the buildings.
No.
Like, the chimneys were obviously put on after the fact in a lot of these buildings, because it doesn't match the architecture whatsoever. So yeah, there's so many things. And that's just the land side of it. Then you start getting into the people and the players of who are these, like you were mentioning the robber barons before, and you start getting into the Vatican and the Jesuits and the Khazarians and all these different groups that all have their hand in this plan. Now, the plan, doesn't benefit us. And from, I have a friend of mine who does podcasts, and he says it's all Babylonian arts is what these people are practicing. They're all Saturn worshipers that, want to get back to that old way of life when we were in that era. Have you looked into or much about the millennial reign of Christ, that 1,000-year reign of Christ?
A little.
Yeah, because
I've
that's
heard
one
it
of the
from
things that recently has really interested me, because if the other thing that's out there is the timeline deception. You look at there's people that say we're off by 1,000 years. There's some people
definitely.
say 300 to 700 years have been manipulated. And I mean, that's a whole fascinating thing in itself when you look at the dating. And I know I'm in, I said Massachusetts, and there's a lot of old stuff out here. And I've noticed on a couple of plaques or old buildings, you see that eye in front of the 1850 or whatever. And I was like, I always wondered about that. And so it's out there.
It's like
It's
approximate. We don't really know.
Yeah.
And with all the weather modifications, we really can't tell what season that we're currently in, because the calendars are so far off that winters last longer, the summers are not in the correct place. They try to blame it on climate change, but we're responsible for climate change. Over 40 countries are participating in weather modifications. And in Texas, it began in 1951. And we have 3 locations that are not that far from Dallas where they have these cloud seeding plants. And you can tell by just looking at the sky, because everything is so damn flat that you can see for hundreds of miles, and you can see where it's coming from. I just don't know exactly where, but I came across a website that's a government site. It shows exactly where the cloud seeding projects are in Texas, and they're pretty far west. So I'd have to take a day to go out there and try to see one. But because we're manipulating the weather so much, we have no idea what natural weather really looks like, because it's been happening my entire life. And
and that goes back to the the first known was in Vietnam during Operation Popeye, where they basically just seeded the clouds to flood the Ho Chi Minh Trail and tried to flood out the Viet Cong. And they did it for a couple months. And people are like, oh, no, that weather manipulation is all conspiracy theory. I'm like, no, it's not. You just have to go research. It is well documented that we've been doing this for a long time. And if it's been documented for a long time, they've been doing it even longer.
Yeah. And I watched a video from, I think it was a Harvard professor, and he was talking about how they were introducing weather modifications for the first time, and it's going to begin in 2020. I'm like, what does this guy think? We're stupid?
Yeah.
I mean, for the most part, we are.
Well, yeah, no, I don't disagree there. The majority of us are stupid. Yes.
And so, like California hardly gets any rain, because wherever you're drawing moisture from, it's going to take it from somewhere else. And so these regions are just drying up, but that's all part of the plan,
Well, and I notice it here in the Northeast, because, we used to get regular snow up here, and now the snow is so sporadic and bizarre. Like the even the texture of the snow is different now at times than before. Like we had a snowstorm a couple weeks ago where I've never seen snow like it in my life. It, you step on it and it like made this weird noise. You couldn't make snowballs with it. It ended up turning into ice right away. Whereas, snow normally melts and goes crunchy and then this went just like overnight to a sheet of ice. It's weird. But it's, you play with it long enough, you're going to eventually break the system. And, I think they've manipulated it to a point where they can still control it. But I mean, you saw, almost when that, it's funny because when that trucker convoy started in Ottawa, there was a massive blizzard that formed right around here. And it came east to west, and it was supposed to go right to them, but it died right before it got to them.
Interesting.
And then there was another one this past weekend where it came straight across, just north of the Great Lakes, and was going straight for it. And then all of a sudden it dipped down south and hit us. But yeah, it's definitely, I'm with you. They've been modifying the weather for ages, and, and then they mess with the calendars too. So we're not in sync with, what the natural flow of events is.
Yeah.
So
who knows?
No, not me. Like I say, the more I learn, the less I know.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, unless you've been doing this research for years and years, it's hard to get a grasp on everything. And everything is just so well hidden that we're relying on the internet, which is full of deception and altered history just right before your eyes. Like back in 2019, because I was teaching history at that time, and our project was find a philosopher and write about him. And right before I had announced that assignment, I noticed that Nicholas Copernicus was listed as a philosopher. And then after the moment the day that I said, I had suggested it to one of our students, I looked up on Wikipedia and it called him a mathematician. I was like, holy shit. They literally changed his occupation in a matter of a month. And I found that very interesting. And now everybody's talking about the Mandela effect and how history is just being changed right before our very eyes. And, and they're just covering everything up. It's like, they're working on that book that Leonardo DiCaprio and James Cameron produced the rights for The Devil in the White City with Keanu Reeves. And it's about the 1893 World's Fair. And I'm curious how they're going to do this. I mean, they bought the rights to this movie in 2010. So it's like they knew that people were going to discover the deception of history, and the World Fairs was going to be a subject later on down the road. And it's like they were waiting for this moment to release this series to kind of like counter inform people of all our discoveries, just discovering all these deceptions. And so people who love television and believe everything that they see, they're going to believe the narrative versus our research. So I think this is all intentional.
Oh yeah, the timing is spot on.
Yeah.
I when I heard that, I'm like, this is great. I'm like, we're winning, because they don't attack it unless it's starting to gain some momentum. And I saw that with like the whole old world Tartaria back in 2020 when Bloomberg magazine did a hit piece on it.
Yeah.
And, they just went and, labeled it as a crazy conspiracy theory. And then they went and interviewed the guy from the Tartarian meltdown, Red Bricks, that says everything is a melted building. And, and then they took some shots at John Levi and things like that. But I got great pride out of that article because they needed to defend their narrative, right? And anytime you see a hit piece out there, it's not just because they felt like writing it. It's because they feel threatened and they feel like, okay, well, we have to give our side of the story now. And I feel that The Devil in the White City is going to be that. They're going to try and find a way to give you a new narrative on the World's Fair.
Of course.
I don't know how they're going to do it. I'm fascinated to see it, especially with CGI and stuff. This could be an amazing show. But at the same time, even that story has some, skepticism to it, because the whole story behind H.H. Holmes being, probably one of the most prolific serial killers in American history is, some people say it's not even real. They say it's nonfiction. So
yeah,
I don't know. I read the book, and because I was hoping they would give us some insight as to how the buildings were built, and, or some insight as to, honestly, I thought it was a real book. And then I got into it and I'm like, I start reading it. I'm like, how do they know all the details of everything he did? I'm like, this is amazing. And then I'm like, oh, this is a story. This isn't even a real book.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how they portray Holmes, because I've seen it in a couple different, articles and things where, some people say he didn't even exist.
Yeah, it's possible.
And then it was just kind of a fear thing at the fair to keep people in line. But I don't know. That's another thing about the fairs, though. You never hear about anything bad happening, right? There was never any issues, no health breakouts, no disease, no fights, no nothing. It was almost like this was just a peaceful gathering.
Yeah, but when you see pictures, I mean, everybody's just crammed together, and there's thousands of people just all. I mean, the entire floor of the fair was just wall to wall people. Just
oh yeah, at the kickoff of Chicago, they had 100,000 people in the administration building, and yeah, like you said, they were shoulder to shoulder. And then you look out in the court that's in my background here, and a lot of times those people were in one end, and there was a couple thousand people just crammed in there.
Yeah.
But then there's other times when you see nobody, which is very interesting also. That's another little rabbit hole that people go into, is all these pictures of old cities where there's no people or no life whatsoever in them.
Yeah. Like that picture in San Francisco where it just kind of like there's like a panoramic of like 3 giant photos just pasted together, and there's nobody in it, not a single person.
And like everybody says, it's during the day. It's like it's either around lunchtime or it's around dinner time. So it's not like it's at 4 a.m. when the sun's just coming up and there wouldn't be anybody in town. This is at a time when people would be in the town if it existed, which goes into the whole rabbit hole of the model cities, and how some of these pictures, that they had Photoshop back in the 1850s. They were able to manipulate photos. They were able to layer photos in. And, so even some of the photos are doctored, and you get into those and look at the vanilla skies in the pictures. A lot of the skies are whited out, almost as if they're trying to cover, hide what was behind these buildings or anything that might be in the air. And I've heard both ends of the argument. Oh, well, it has to do with the cameras they used. And then other people are like, no, the exposure wouldn't matter, because you look at this picture where there's clouds in it, and then you look at this picture and it's a vanilla sky. So
yeah,
I don't know what to think about it, but I don't trust it.
Yeah.
That's what I do know.
And then there's a lot of missing photos that have just been removed over who knows how long of a period. You know? So we can't trust some of these archives.
No. And that's why I tell people, when you find something, catalog it, download it, and get it off of the internet, because a lot of my resources that I was using even 3 years ago are gone now. You can't find them anymore. They've either the web page is gone. You get the 401 error or 404 error. And so, save it. Because like you're saying, they are also manipulating data heavily. Yeah. So the same source data you may have looked at last year, it may be different now.
Oh, yeah.
And that's another sign that something's up, right? Because you're not changing history for no reason.
Yeah. Well, Matt, it was a really pleasure talking to you. I mean, we can just go on for hours and hours. And I know you have your show tonight, because it's Monday night, right? You're going to have a debate.
Yes. Monday Night Master Debaters.
Nice. Yeah, I've been definitely enjoying that.
Yeah, I'd love to have you on sometime if you'd like to join us, man. It's a lot of fun. We just get, like I said, we get 4 to 5 people on, and we go in with no agenda, and usually talk a little bit of current events, and then it goes wherever. But that's my favorite.
Best kind of discussions when they're just not planned,
Yeah. And it's funny because my buddy Ghost, who does My Third Eye podcast, took the idea of the Master Debaters and does it on Friday night in something called Talk of the Tavern, where he just opens up his Zoom at 7:00, 7:30, and you can come and go as you please. And people are coming in and going out all night. And it's just like going to a bar. You go in, you have a drink, have a smoke, talk to your friends, you go out for a little bit, come back. And, but I think that those type of formats where you get people just having discussions again, right. and like, this was such a great conversation with you, man. I really appreciate it. Having me on, and because I like, much like you, we could go on for days on this stuff. But I think these conversations are important, because one of the things that happened in the last 20 years is we stopped having them. We
Yeah.
stopped, the old, you don't talk politics or religion. Well, why? Why don't we talk those? Is there something into it that we should be talking about? Maybe, and that's, so I'm just trying to bring back discussion. That's all I want. And I want people to disagree too. That's one of the great things about the debaters is we have people who don't agree all the time. And there is some really good back and forth. And that's healthy. That's what we need. We don't want to live in an echo chamber, but at the same time, we can't live in the extremism end of it either.
Yeah, definitely.
We got to find that happy medium. And I think what you and I are doing with our podcasts, and, I'm really excited to hear that you're writing a book. I love to read now, so I will definitely be picking that up when that comes out. And I think we need to do more of that. Just get it out there. The more truth we can get out there. And even, like I said, when I started my podcast, even if I get one person to listen and say that, I'm going to think about things a little bit, I've done my job. And, the feedback I get from my show from people, and, the people that I've met doing my show, that send DMs or emails, it's so cool, because I'm just regular guy like you, but I got a little platform now, and can share my mind, and people actually are interested. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, my career is, I started out as a journalist, so I went to school to become a journalist, and I didn't really pursue it because a lot of the places that I interviewed with, they just wanted me to pick a political side. And I was like, why can't I just be a reporter and report the news the way it is? I don't want to pick a side. Like, I don't want to play that whole paradigm. And they're like, well, this sounds like this place isn't for you. Once you go work for Fox News, I'm like, well, they are polarized as well.
They're on the other side. Yeah.
And I'm like, I just want to be in the middle. They're like, well, maybe you need to do your own blog. I'm like, well, I have a blog, but it's not satisfying and it doesn't pay that well.
Well, I deal with the same thing in corporate America. I've been in it for 20 years now, and it went from the least political arena in the world to the most political arena now. Everything is about signaling now, and they want us to put our pronouns in our profile and all this stuff, and it's like,
that's ridiculous.
We're going to extremes. And I'm with you. I'm gonna lay in the middle. I don't like teams. I always find that when you get on teams, they end up taking you in the wrong direction. So I'm gonna stay lone wolf for now, and just keep doing my thing, and if people enjoy it, people join in and listen and join the discussion. And if not, they'll move along, and so be it.
It was just like, we just had a martial arts tournament on Saturday, and the opposing school, like, their parents were just, rooting to beat him up, get him, kick his ass. And I was like, I'm looking for the camaraderie and the bringing, because when you spar, that's when you learn the most martial arts. You don't learn it in class and doing repetitive things. You put it you put it to good work, and that's how you solidify what you've learned. And some of these parents, I mean, they're so programmed by following sports and rooting for a certain team that this tribalism mentality it causes you to hate the other side, when really it's the same freaking school. It's just in another city. You're
all in the same club.
Yeah. It's like,
I get that in my son's 8, and he plays, we're in a small town. We're playing, he's playing basketball this winter, and we played a town the other day, and same thing. The parents are screaming and going nuts. And I'm like, I help out. I'm, the assistant coach or whatever. And I'm cheering on their kids as much as I'm cheering on mine. Cause I'm like, these kids are 8 and 9 years old. Anything they do that's good right now, we should be cheering and encouraging, because especially in today's day and age, but yet you get these cutthroat parents who don't understand psychology, right? And they don't understand the mental makeup of this, that you should just be supporting everyone at this age, not no winners, no losers, right? I mean, you're doing, I'm not into that everybody gets a trophy shit either, but I'm saying that at a certain age, it's about just being there, sportsmanship, competing, and just being out there, not winning and losing and killing the other team. It's about, how about we leave this game and we're like, wow, those guys are good guys. Now I got 10 more friends I can call if I want to play basketball with.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to bring that back, because we've gotten away from that. We've gotten into that blood mentality. Like it's us versus them. Whereas I want it to be us. Let's get back to us and get away from the us versus them, because everywhere we go, it's us versus them. Mm-hmm. Everything is set up that way. Sports, entertainment, politics, everything is set up in that way to divide us. Whereas what is supposed to bring us together? We need to find that thing that brings us together, because that's what we need now.
That's exactly what they don't want.
No, but I think what you and I are doing, man, we're doing our little part in it, right? Yeah. To bring people together, to bring in discussion again, to bring in thought, to break the narrative. And I think we're spell breakers. I consider us, we are out here to try and unveil their spell, to break it, and to show it for what it's worth.
Breaking the illusion.
Yes.
Sure. Well, Matt, it's already been 2 hours, and I know you need at least an hour to prep and get some food and re-energize.
I got to go take my shepherd for a walk.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I mean, it was a pleasure, and I hope your podcast takes off, because I'm really doing this to put my favorite shows in a the spotlight, per se, and hopefully it gets you some attention and get some other people who would never have discovered you to tune into your podcast and enjoy it as much as I have. So
Mike, I really appreciate that, man. That's great. I really do.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, you take care, and we'll definitely talk again. I definitely want to make an appearance on your Great Debaters show. I can't remember the name of it.
Don't worry about it. It's the Master Debaters.
Play
on words.
Yeah, but I definitely want to make an appearance, and it sounds like a lot of fun. I love these forums and these discussions, and I makes me want to do my own, because I belong to a meetup here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and and we all get together in person, and we have these discussions about the true Earth, and I think it'd be good to have a healthy debate and talk about other stuff, and hopefully it wakes other people up and they want to join and follow.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, man. Well, we'll talk to you soon, and you take care.
Yes, sir. I'd love to talk to you, man. Be good. We'll be in touch.
All right. Take care. Thank you so much for watching this edition of KGUP Presents. Be sure to follow Matt of the Great Deception Podcast to watch and listen to his shows. Just click the links in the description. And coming this month, I'll be doing more interviews, including an interview with Michelle Gibson on Unguru. I'll be doing a few more shows with some surprise guests. I don't know if you noticed, but YouTube has been demonetizing my episodes and removing views, and they're definitely shadow banning me. It's just part of what we do now. My audio podcast is unaffected, so if you prefer to listen to my shows, just search KGUP Presents on your favorite podcast platform, and I have all these interviews on BitChute and Odyssey. And if you want a little extra and you want to be a part of the show, please join my Patreon. It's for as little as $3 a month. For annual subscribers, you'll get first access to my book that's coming out later this year. You'll get a free copy if you're an annual subscriber, and you also get some cool merchandise and a lot more. And if you love this show and you don't want to be a Patreon supporter, I understand. But if you want to get a t-shirt, hat, or sling bag, just go to kgup1065.com/shop. The links are also in the description. 100% of these proceeds go to running the show and the radio station KGUP FM Emerge Radio, just like the t-shirt that I'm wearing. You can check out what's playing right now by saying Google, ask KGUP FM to play, or if you have Alexa, just say, Alexa, play KGUP FM. Again, thanks for watching KGUP Presents. Until next time, this is Mikey J. I'm out.
The earth is flat. Bro, you need to check your facts. I got high up through the roof, and I landed on the moon. The moon flat too. In reality, everything is just in 2D, like a video game from 1983. I'm side scrolling up and down the street while y'all sleep. Call me B.O.B. cause I don't see the curve. Messing up my vibe, yeah, you got a lot of nerve. Read a book, nah, I don't wanna learn. Read a book, nah, I don't wanna learn. They say that we are king. For me and my homies, we don't say it, we just spray it. I'ma leave it, namaste. Do your research, how much I gotta say it. Earth is flat. Bro, you need to check your facts. I got high up through the roof, and I landed on the moon. The moon flat too. In reality, everything is just in 2D, like a video game from 1983. I'm side scrolling up and down the street while y'all sleep. Y'all sleep.